Hi YouTube, I'm Andy. Welcome back to my shed. This is part 2 of my LED matrix build. In part 1 we looked at this prototype unit, it's 22 by 6 cells. We took it apart, we talked about the construction and materials, and then we made some plans for a new larger unit which will be 24 by 18 cells. We also looked at a custom PCB I've designed for a power module that will allow us to connect all the LEDs up and give them sufficient power. In this episode we're going to be constructing the backplane. So this is the surface that the LED strips will be stuck onto. We're going to mark it up, cut some holes, attach the LED strips and then wire it all together. Hopefully by the end of this video we'll have some flashing lights. In the last video we looked at this custom PCB I designed for a modular power supply unit. On this we can mount 3 buck converters. Each one has a smoothing capacitor on the output and then drives 2 connectors which go to the LED strips. On the left here is where the power comes in and can be daisy chained out. Now I've got connectors here on the outputs. These are JST XA connectors. I've got lots of them, used them before and happen to like them. But you could just connect wires straight into the board, solder them into the pads here, and then connect the other end to the LED strips. The benefit of using connectors is that it makes the final assembly easier and also means you can easily take it apart again if you need to do any maintenance. So we'll need to make up some connectors like these.
They will solder onto the LED strips at one end and then just plug straight into the power board. So for this I'm using some stranded wire. Black is for the ground connection. I've got blue for the data signal and red for +5 volts. We'll need some JST connectors. There are two kinds here, the socket, which is soldered into the PCB, and then we've got the plug which connects onto the cables using crimp pins like these. So we'll need 3 of those. Just bend those back and pull them off the connecting strip. And then we need to cut some lengths of wire. I'm going to just cut these a bit extra long for now and then cut them down to size when I know exactly how long they should be. So let's start with the black wire, and we're going to strip about 2 millimeters of the insulation from the end. Then we take the crimp pin, make sure it's found the right way, and then insert it into the crimping tool. And I'm going to start off on the 2 millimeter hole, and then the wire gets pushed in, and you need to make sure the insulation is snug up against the first crimping part. And then we crimp the first crimp, which goes around the conductor, and then come back and do the second crimp around the insulation. Sometimes these JST connections can be a little bit tight, so after doing it on 2 millimeters, I'll go down to 1.9 and just give it a very gentle squeeze to make sure everything's closed up nicely. You might need to prise it out of the crimping tool after that, but then it should just slot straight into the connector really easily. So the black is the first connection on the left, then we need to do the same for the blue in the middle and the red on the right. Then the final step is to give it a gentle twist just to hold all those wires together. These connections are going to be soldered onto the LED strips after they've been stuck onto the backplane. But I've got some spare LEDs here, and I thought I'd show you a close-up of how we prepare the cables and then solder them onto these strips. We'll need 3 different lengths of connectors because the outside ones have to go a bit further than the ones closer to the middle. So I created a very simple spreadsheet just to work out the lengths for me, and then I can cut all my connectors to the correct length before soldering them on. Now this is just a test piece, so I'm going to assume we've got the right length here and just trim off all the wires to the same length, and then we'll strip off around 2 millimeters of insulation from each of the wires. Then I'm going to tape the wires down onto a piece of foam board just to hold them still while I tin the ends with some solder. And I'm also going to stick down the LED strip so that I can tin the pads. First I'm applying a little bit of flux from a flux pen. This will degrease the surface and help the solder to flow. So we want a fairly generous dab of solder on the end because we don't want to have to apply any more solder when we're fixing it to the LEDs. So I tin the leads and then just go and add a small dab of solder to each of the pads. Then I'm going to add a small piece of 10mm diameter clear heat shrink that we can shrink over the connections when we're done. Now you need to make sure your wires are connected up to the correct pads, but I'm starting in the middle with the blue data line. So I'm just going to try and touch my soldering iron across both the pad and the wire to melt the solder, and they should just flow easily together and stick without too much problem. Then I'm going to move the black wire in and do the same. I'm using a small chisel tip here, so you can normally get it in between. One of the downsides, as you can see, is that sometimes it just slips off the wire, so I'm going to push down on that one and put a nice connection there. And then finally the red wire. Bring that over, hold it in place, and then just touch the two together and it should just melt and solder nice and easily. I'm just going to put my finger over those connections while I take the tape off so that I don't stress them. Then slide down the heat shrink sleeving and grab my hot air gun. I've got this set to 180 degrees C for this kind of heat shrink sleeving. The mileage may vary. And then I can just bend it back and do the underside too. Now these will be attached to the back plane, so it won't be quite so easy to bend it back like this, but it shows you the basic idea. So there's the finished article. We've got some good connections there and a bit of heat shrink sleeving just to protect everything and hold it together nicely. Now on the finished article, this will be on the back plane and these connections will be poking through the slot. So we'll be soldering these connections on and doing the heat shrink sleeving in place. For the data interconnect wires at the other end, I created this simple template out of a piece of foam board. This is 33mm across the middle, that's the distance between our LED strips, and there's around 15mm on either side. So I can use this to mark and then cut the correct length of wire. Then hold that up against the template, bend the legs down around the middle, and with a little bit of straightening, I've got a nice uniform interconnect wire.
So that's it for this episode. In the next video, we're going to look at the construction of the case and the dividers. I'll be showing you the jig that I use to cut the dividers up on my table saw really quickly and easily. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.